Yes, hello and welcome everyone to the IrisBG webinar on March the 7th, 2019. I'm Havard from IrisBG, and together with me we have Greg Payton, the Director of Living Collections at the Dawes Arboretum.
Indeed, which also covers the dead collections, because we have the dried specimens, but they came from living specimens, so I guess it's covered.
Okay, thank you. The Director of Collections, then, I suppose, or yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Dead collections doesn't sound exactly so exciting, does it? Sort of, yeah.
Well, the specification is because we do have a history department, so they have collections of other sorts of materials. So we just considered it living collections to, as opposed to furniture and clocks and things.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's have let's see if we have some topics we can bring up here that we've got into the system. I'll just take what came through the chat box. If you have questions today, there's a chat feature on your toolbar. I'm not sure if you then use the web version or the app, but either way, there should be a chat function where you can send in questions. We also have received a few questions through email, and we will try to cover as many as we can within the allotted 45 minutes, 50 minutes. We are recording this, so if you would like to see this later, this will be put on the YouTube channel, which you can find a link through our website, or just Google IrisBG and you'll find it there. There's a special playlist for all the webinars, so that's great entertainment for the weekend. Great. Okay, so let's see. We have I'm just being a bit picking from random here. So one question here, which is the philosophical one, I suppose. Mapping plants under glass. I assume we're now talking within a greenhouse setting, etc. How do you map plants that are inside in a closed space? First of all, it depends on how you talk about when you say mapping, because if you look at Iris, if I just bring up the simplest way to map plants, I'm just bringing up a trial data set here now. The easiest way to map a plant is, of course, I'm just going to bring up, just searching something here. So we got let's say we want to deal with this particular plant here from 2017. I'm going to go full screen so you can see this a bit better. And let's say this one, if you want to map this one, one very simple way is to just do it directly here in the desktop by dragging the marker to the location that the plant is. And as you can see, depending then on what kind of base map you have, here I have Google Satellite. So if this was out in the garden and the map is reasonably up to date, you can get a reasonably good approximation on where the plant actually is by just putting the marker where the plant is. So that's quite easy. Now the other approach, which is used by several gardeners, is to go out in the field and either use the IrisBG app and use the phone, and complemented by the GPS found on the phone. However, the GPS is, of course, on a normal consumer grade phone isn't necessarily that accurate. So it might end up being easier and more accurate to actually use the screen and see and drag the marker in the right position there as well. And that's when it becomes tricky. When you have, let's say, if I'm now Google Satellite, if your base map is more, let's take one thing I know might be quite poor, Google Map, for example, here, you suddenly have very few reference points, so it doesn't become very easy. And that's what you typically also would get in a greenhouse setting. unless, and that's the big thing here, unless you have actually drawn up a very detailed map of your greenhouse. Then you get very accurate location and visual aids, visual reference points, so you can actually place the marker quite nicely. And that's a question that comes up quite often. How accurate is this? I mean, depends on, you can make these maps as detailed as you like. So when I'm now looking at Google, I'm restricted from how far down the satellites have taken pictures. So this is as good as it gets. But you can draw maps that are much more detailed, and you can zoom into. So you on the screen you see a small tray almost of plants. So that is very possible. But then we go back to the there's one person with some walkie-talkie in the background. I'm sure.
Right, with the person with the with their microphone turned on.
Yeah. I'll mute a few people and then maybe that helps. Okay, great, thank you. So then you can use, as I said, the normal sort of visual aids. Going over to GPS, then do you have equipment that is precise enough to give you those detailed coordinates? And B, where are you in the grounds? So GPS is dependent on you having good coverage so that the satellites can see, or your phone or whatever machine you have can reach the satellites. And that works okay out in the grass here, but if you start to go underneath the canopy or inside a building, then you get into trouble again, or you don't get a very good signal or no signal at all. There are some techniques to alleviate that, but that will typically require investment to maybe GPS repeaters and sort of beacons and things like that. But that's a different story altogether that I don't think we will cover here. But maybe, Greg, you can supplement a bit more.
No, you've covered it. I would use a couple of strategies that you've touched on here. We map out of doors using mostly the older IrisBG mobile software that ran on Windows Mobile, and we run that on a Trimble GPS receiver that with some on-the-fly auto correction in the field, I get down to about 11 centimeter accuracy, so I consider that pretty good. And then I use that basically only for mapping new plants, and then of course I use it for the GIS work for capturing planting beds and roadways and things like that. But then we set up our base map as a background, and then but then I use the Android and/or iOS app, tablet or phone app, for every other sort of function like inventory work. Yeah, there you go. That's an ArcGIS map. So these polygons could be drawn, and if you wanted to map inside of, say, a conservatory or a greenhouse, you could, if you had like a sketch or a layout of like a blueprint of what the features look like inside, if you had bed structures or walls and pathways and things, you could try to transfer those to the GIS basically by more or less tracing out the shapes into the allotted space, and then you could drag and drop your plants within the planting beds within the greenhouse. That's another way to do it. Or you could also touch on just marking the plants as being you could just number the beds within the greenhouse and then just have the plant without the actual coordinates, but just dropped into the bed number that's inside of the greenhouse that would narrow down its possible locations, but not the exact, coordinates where it's located.
Yep,
Makes
exactly.
sense?
So I suppose one thing that we recommend is to sometimes be a bit pragmatic as well, because it's the plants that are going to live for many years are worthwhile mapping accurately, maybe. But short-lived plants, sometimes you just want to. The key point in many cases, is to be able to find the plant, and not necessarily to make some big constructional decision based on its location. But so be a bit pragmatic in how you approach this, I think, is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go back now, I've changed the location of this one, and then I can save, and we have a new location. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then if you just go ahead and clear that location out of there, the coordinates out, just go ahead and clear those out and then save it, and then just pull up the location code button, map button. So this is basically how you would map it into a bed. So say you zoomed in and you had your GIS turned on and you had your conservatory blocked out into quadrants or beds within the conservatory, you could just list that within the IrisBG as to what bed it was, and then it would show the dot in that particular region of that bed within the house.
Yep.
That's how we map perennials. We don't map perennials as to an exact coordinate on the Earth. We just say it's in, planting bed, some number like, like a DW016 or something like that. That's a planting bed at the Daweswood house.
Yeah, that's very common to be not bother to give it accurate, but just so. I see there's a quite cool number of interesting spin-off questions related to mapping. So
right.
take one step back and what Greg mentioned there is that if you go back here to management and locations, you will see all your garden areas here, and you can see here that each of these beds in this particular data set has been given a coordinate. So that's probably one of the first things you could look into when you set up Iris. Make sure that all your beds have a center point, and then you can already produce useful maps for your collection without having mapped individual plants. So if I look at this here, for example, now, here's the large lawn you see here, and here's the other beds lined up with different center points. So here you can organize the all your beds and give that as a starting point. There was another question coming in here about when you open the map. In this particular garden, I'm now getting Google Satellite. But if you have set up your own map, which is a second question we have, which we'll also reply to, how do I get this list to point to another map? So I don't have to constantly have to switch to this one. You can do that if you go to Management Collections. I'm just going to ignore my changes here. And then if you see here on my database, most gardens will have one option here. And then you have under Locations Map. This is where you can configure how your mapping will work within your garden. The most important things you can do is to change the default map coming up. So we see here, Google Satellite is set, but I can then change that to maybe, for example, OpenStreetMap could be an alternative for me, for example. There we go. And then also I can change the marker, so that's coming up. So I want to have maybe for me, I prefer the diamond for areas and a nice little blue-orange ring for the plants. Green ring, I suppose, is more nice, like that. So don't be tempted to, unless you have no coordinates in place at all, and you know exactly what you're doing, don't be tempted to start fooling around with these upper details here, the coordinate system and the datum. That will, say no more. So,
yeah,
okay.
because if you already have coordinates, they're already based on those settings. So it could shift the points off from where you intended them to be. So. Yeah, that's the first thing you do is you set up your coordinate system, and then you start mapping plants by that coordinate system, and then that would also match what you have on your GPS unit if you're using that, so that you're speaking the same language.
Exactly. So if you, for some reason, have a very clear idea that you have to change to something else, then we have a conversion project on our hands. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then relation to this is, of course, how do I get my own maps in? Because that's also some questions here coming in. I would like to get my own maps in available within Iris and maybe also on my website, Garden Explorer. The way to do that is that your map needs to be on what is called a WMS, which stands for Web Map Service. So it's an open standard mapping technology. And that's when you have, let's say you know what that is and you have that already. The way you set it up is down here under definitions and map providers. I have a few maps here. So the way that works is, I'm not going to go explain how, but if you have a service, then and you have somebody who knows GIS, they will often be able to help you to set it up. But if not, get in touch and we can help you to set it up. So that's basically how that works. But it's you need a website where that service is available, etc. And I would like to stress that there are some, if you live in, or let's put it differently, you may have a local parish or county or state that has some interesting, for example, satellite imagery or other things that covers your area. So that's worth checking out. I know, for example, in some parts of the West, was it in Utah? I think they had quite a good, if I'm not mistaken, etc. So that's worth checking out. And if it has the right coordinate systems, etc., it can be plugged in here. So here I can then test it, but it's important that you actually switch it on, which I didn't. Let's see if that works. Probably doesn't. It's an old. Yeah. You can have web services that give you rainfall, for example, and things like that. You might want to do that when you have a wild collected material that you want to use maps on. Yeah, great. Yeah,
and something fun about that is, we actually have a map that I can display that shows our soil types all across the properties, and so we can see whether we're on a clay loam or whether we're on a different ratings of clay and different soils. So you can sort of locate plants. It's like, why does this tree always die when I plant it here? Well, it turns out that's the worst, the worst clay soils we have or something. So you can help to, maybe plan out different plants that way. Yeah, he's got a little trial here going. So.
Yeah, I'm just going to show people the soil layers here. Yeah. Maybe this is an old, I don't know. So you can add these. Oh, here we go.
There we go.
You can add these layers yourself. It is a bit techy, so we can help you if you get stuck on how to do it. But in general, this is something you can do yourself. Sort of like you can change oil in your car yourself. I suppose that was a bad analogy, but.
Idea.
It's typically, the reason it's not, I mean, we could have made it more user-friendly, but it's typically a bit techy by nature, and it's something you do once or very seldom. So it's sort of, yeah. So here's the soil map of Dawes, and if we switch to another Dawes map, you see that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, as you zoom in, you get more features. You'll keep zooming in. You'll get grid lines for different cells of where we map plants into and planting beds and things like that. So there's the beds appear and the grid cells appear, trails and streams and the topo lines and things like that. So then when I map new beds, even if I needed to map an area under canopy, I would do that right now while the trees are leafless. And even if I just map the beds, later on I can just drop the plants into the beds based on their position within the bed and have a reasonably good display of where the plants are. So you can just do it in stages. As long as you have good markers or survey points or something that is accurate, you can base plants off of that as well.
Yep. Okay, yeah, so there was one question here. So can you overlay your own maps on top of Google Map, etc. You can, you can do some overlaying in Iris here by saying when you define a map type, you can put in your map layer and then say that Google is a base layer underneath. So that will work depending on transparency. It is a bit, it's not necessarily the sort of perfect way to do this. I also believe, just as a big sort of point, or sort of not a big point, but worth mentioning, that I think Google and Bing, or at least Google, are quite strict on these things, especially if you can't do it online. Let's put it that way, on a website, to overlay your own maps on top of Google's maps. They don't like that. So, but you can do a few things here. You could see that actually, if I go back to this map here, which was there was one here, Oslo ArcGIS. Here we have Bing map superimposed. So if you look at this map, you have a ArcGIS map aligning, which has only the edge of the garden, and then you have the city or city map going around it. So that's quite helpful to give you some reference point when you're working on it inside Iris. Mm-hmm. So that's one example.
Yeah, we just have, and basically drawn in from other maps, we have the surrounding roads to our properties mapped on just like within a mile or so, radius of the Arboretum grounds, just for reference.
Yep. Okay, I don't know if there's anything. So final point of saying, just to, if anybody's looking into getting maps set up, I'm going to just show on our website, there is a bit of this sort of help to guide you along a bit. I'm just going to bring that up here for you. If I get the website up here, come on. So if you go to product mapping, and then you scroll down to preparing maps for hosting. So that is if you want us to host it, but some of these techniques apply regardless of if you're going to host it yourself. Some large universities probably have a WMS service available, but most sort of botanic gardens don't. So yeah.
There's also an option, if you could switch back to mine just to show. There's no way to view it, but we have an internal only. You see that the GeoServer reference right there? So that's internal to our own network. It's not broadcasting out on the internet. So you can and that's a freeware application that you can actually install on the server, and you can open it up so that it's visible to the entire internet. But you just have to make sure your network is secured from hackers and whatnot. So anything we want visible from the web, we want in somebody else's buildings or some other organization, not us. So we're not worried about getting overrun by bots and things. But that is the system I use if I'm making changes to beds and things, and I just want to see them quickly. I can just dump the shape files into that GeoServer, and it immediately lets me see what I've edited in the field before it gets uploaded in a larger upload to a web map server. But it's just like a field checking way to compare the plants and the beds that I've just mapped.
Yep. Yeah. So that's that you went straight into the question that Juliana had here about what the different way WMS things. Yeah, there are a couple of options for you. There is the free product that you can set up. That requires a decent amount of skill to not only set up the server, but also to configure the maps. It's not for the if you have a tight schedule on your yeah.
And it is very cartoony. It's not, the symbology isn't as neat as ArcGIS, and it's very cut and dried. It's great, actually. I load it onto my Trimble unit when I go out for the background maps, because it's easy to see in the field on a small screen, because it is so black and white compared to shading and various colors of things.
Yep. And so that's the Geo server. The alternative is ArcGIS server, which has a cost to it. So we have one of those running, and we can host maps for you. But if you have that in as an institution, that's great. That's an option, because then if you then want to push your maps onto that service, that's quite easy. I'm not going to go into details how to do it, but if you already have a server, you probably also know or have somebody at your institution who knows how to do that. So yeah. There was a question here about how to. I mean, just to be clear, also, Iris has a sort of a where does Iris stop and where does other products take over, and that's probably exactly where we are now with the WMS is sort of our interface of where Iris talks to another type of product, in this case GeoServer or ArcGIS server, and Iris is not a tool to draw maps. Then you need another tool like ArcGIS or Quantum GIS or something like that.
Right. So keep in mind, I was just going to say, to keep in mind, everything that comes out of Iris is more or less point-based. So it's a dot on a map. You can't draw like a mass of plants and put a circle or a polygon shape to signify where the plants are. You have to put like a center point for. But then on your GIS map, you can actually have your bed or a polygon set up that you put your point on to reference it.
Yep. There was a comment here also that some person doesn't have any map providers. No, you typically when you get in here, you would have three options here. You have the global maps that comes with Iris. I suggest that you look at that and disable the ones that you never use. That makes it easier to use Iris, like Greg has done here. So you only have the ones that you find relevant. And then this will probably be empty for you if you haven't looked into this yet. And so that's where you then will start adding by clicking the green plus button and recording new ones. So, yeah.
She says that option isn't there for her with the geologist.
Yeah, then I would look into your access control, or maybe you haven't got the mapping feature at all. That might be another possibility.
That's true. You have to have you have to have purchased mapping as part of your package.
Yeah. So, but this will also be hidden for you if you're not administrator. Most of the definitions would be hidden if you're not an administrator, so that's something to look into as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Let's. Okay, so here's one question about having trouble to remove a tree from Garden Explorer. So you cut it down, but it's still on the website. I think I'm quite confident that you by running the task it should just disappear. But if you let's go here, if you do system tasks and transfer to Web Explorer,
it might depend too what the status is. If you've marked the status as a procedure or a non-existing status, then it should disappear at the next transfer.
Yep. That's basically.
I'll try it again.
Yeah. So your dot next to it should either be yellow or red. If it's a green dot, that means it's going to publish.
Right. Well, I mean, what I did was I kept the original data and then I added the updated removal with the red dot.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try it again and see if it shows up.
Yeah, you should be able to upload it then, and it should, as long as you've refreshed your screen and you're getting new data downloading and not cached data.
Yeah, I'll let you know if it doesn't work.
Yeah, and also when you look at the your site, let's just do Dawes Arboretum. You can also double check at the bottom here when it was last updated.
Okay.
So I see that that's refreshed. Yep. It was now we're sort of sliding into Garden Explorer, which is fine. There was one question here about can you auto load data to Garden Explorer? The answer is yes. What you can do is on our website, you can go here under support downloads, and there's a software tool here called IrisBG batch jobs. So that can be scheduled to start the upload to Garden Explorer. So every Thursday at 4 o'clock or whatever. So have a look at that. That can be that's just a light software that can be installed on a computer that already has Iris. But when that process runs, obviously the computer needs to be switched on at the same time. So keep that in mind. Yep.
I suppose you could install it on your server if you had a separate server system.
You could, yeah, but you then have to have it requires Iris to be installed at the same place. But yes, if you have that, then yeah, you could do that. Yeah, no problem.
I actually did install it on my server because there was a while our network switch was down and I had to access Iris only from the server. So.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so yeah, Juliana, if you don't see the definitions, then look at the access control that you've been given. That's a general kind of thing that we can repeat a bit here as well, in that when it comes to access control under authorization here. So if I'm going to look at this demo instead of Greg's setup.
Show my passwords. No.
Exactly. So when you have these role types, administrator and then a few other role types. So there's no harm in having several persons having the administrator role. So some people think that there are some gardens who log in with admin all the time, which is frowned upon. So make sure every user have their own initials that they log in with. And if that person needs to have extensive access, that person maybe is granting access and doing all kinds of administrative roles or functions, then give that person the administrator role as well, and then you're up and running. Alternatively, you can also separate it so that every time you need to do those administrative tasks, you log in with the administrator. But yeah,
also that's useful because then if you're making edits to records, you can see the actual name of the person that did the editing. Down at the bottom, you see where it says admin. That was last logged in by administrator, and if several people log in as admin, you have no idea which person actually did it. So if you're using your own initials, it'll have your login code as the person that last did the edits.
Yep. Okay.
No way to see edits previous to last. If you do history records, like say you've changed a status from living to dead, and you expand that drop down there, you'll see that each one of those rows has the person that did the edits last on each of those rows. But there's not if you don't create a history row, there's really no logging for every edit ever made to the record. Going back ad infinitum.
Yep. I think the term is audit trail, I believe. So, yeah, there's no full extensive audit trail. That's true. I'm just going to have a quick look to see. Yeah, sorry, Greg.
No, she just said that's as good as it gets. Yeah, you would have to have a much more extensive, database, and you're keeping history for every single edit made, and that's a lot more, more labor and excessive work, I think, than what is probably needed. Sorry, phone is ringing. Had to send it to voicemail. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was trying to mute who. Anyways. Okay.
That was me, sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking about these index examiner questions. So we have, it's very specific, I think. So I think we might do that offline, as it were, directly with. Yeah, thank you. It's not general. So okay, I think we've delved into a lot of mapping and a lot of Card Explorer things. Just want to see if there's any other questions within here that we haven't answered. Well, one thing I could just supplement, and I have a with mapping as well, is that I repeat that when I have the chance, and that is have a look into the possibility to, especially if you have a smaller garden, to consider getting a drone flyover instead of drawing a map. It depends a bit on the garden, but if you now that, especially in Northern Hemisphere with the spring coming up, this is a really good time to do it, because you might have that moment when it's sunny and the canopy isn't out yet. If you can do that, then converting a drone map, when they do that, they can easily, if they are professionals, they can easily convert that to a GIS map that can be very useful, and you have that up and running very quickly, whereas drawing a map obviously can take some time, and that drone map can also be a very good base map to make a proper map as well, or a drawn map.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on it briefly, but something to keep in mind: if you don't have ArcGIS, the Quantum GIS or QGIS is a freeware download, and it creates shape files that are editable by ArcGIS. So they do talk to each other. So if you want to learn GIS and even create some basic maps, the QGIS software is perfectly acceptable for that purpose. It's not as full featured as ArcGIS, but it does the job.
Okay, how do I reinstate a deleted plant? So if you click, if you sort of delete it from here, you can't really delete a whole plant qualifier you have to then delete it regressively. You have to sort of start at the history line and then remove it like that, and now that's gone. But it's not gone until I click save, so that's number one. So if I now think, oh no, then I can click undo. So undo in Iris will just basically bring it back to where you were before the last save.
If you notice down at the green line at the bottom basically said the data is deleted at the next save, so you know that it's still there.
Yeah, now it got a bit confused, so I'm not sure what that was all about. Maybe because I haven't. So what I'm going to do now instead is to just clear it and bring it up again. So I'm getting, there we go. So that's one, but if you mistakenly deleted the plant and then click save, then reinstating it is typing it in again, really.
That's what backups are for.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't, if it's very costly, I don't know how, the thing with a restore is, of course, that it takes a bit of time and it will restore everything, not just the one change you did there, but everything else that happened. So it depends a bit on what kind of backup you have as well. So, yeah.
A little, a nerd tip is if you set up a separate little, database server on your own computer, you can actually run a backup locally and have it attached to Iris, and then see the backup changes if you just wanted to do a little side-by-side editing on the live data with a backup, database running. But it takes some setup and some tweaking as to say what database you're looking at, and keeping that all in order. So it's not for the faint of heart also.
You dive into the you can sit with your never mind. But yes, there's a lot of possibilities. But going back to the backup as well, if you have a cloud service, the backup restore can be taken at any time within the last 2 weeks, at least, maybe 3, depending a bit on the service you have. So there is definitely an option. So that's the key point here. Actually, what we're trying to say is, if you have a cloud service and you made a serious mistake that you think, then get in touch. Don't hesitate to then get in touch, because then you want to do the restore at that point. And the more you work after that, the more problematic it would be to restore, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Great. So that's how you. So the thing is, the key is, I suppose, is that when it comes to the accession screen, it's not so often that you actually would like to delete. I think, it's basically if you've made a duplicate accession or recorded something completely wrong. So you sort of, when you click here, you should be sort of, as you see here, delete cannot be undone. So can be if you have a backup. But it's there to warn you a bit.
Yeah. Just keep in mind, if a plant dies, you don't delete the accession. You just mark the plant as dead, and it's supposed to stay there forever on record, showing that you had it. So.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I'm just seeing if there's any kind of memorial per qualifier be sold in tasks.
That's Elaine. We were discussing the fundings about storing plants in memory of someone as opposed, but yeah, tasks would do the same thing as well. Fundings is just a glorified tasks with more options for labeling different sorts of things in the same record. If you have a funding setup, you can have a tree, a bench, and any other kind of asset all on the same screen on a per person basis. So it's like one task list for each person, but with multiple types together. As a task list is basically, it's all items, or it's all accessions, or it's all names. So its option is there. Just fundings has more options for, like, say the person donates for a sculpture that you have listed, the person donates for a bench, the person donates for a tree, and maybe a structure. You could have all those added to the same entry for Mrs. Jones,
Yeah. Just to dip into that a bit is, the question or discussion we have with sometimes is how to best track memorial trees. Some gardens are happy to just tag it either on the accession as a custom attribute or something. But what works quite well in many cases is to use the funding screen. So where you then here typically record what would you record as a name for the funding? Is it in memory of, Greg, or is it?
Well, not in that field, no. If I'm searching for names, I want to search for, so say it's supposed to be in memory of Elizabeth Smith. I would put Smith Elizabeth because I want to search for my last name. And then when I add the item entry, under the comments of that, I would say in memory of Elizabeth Smith, 2019. So that's on the comment for that. And then you could even add a photo of the particular label on the tree in the little image box. And if she paid $1,000, blah, 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 you can have all those fields filled out. Then you add the contact for the address for the person that did the donation. So yeah, and yeah, in a memory. Yeah. And then we have a policy and then comma, like a 2019 or something. So that's what it would say on that's what it would say on the label. But the start date and end date, we have a policy that the tree via donation is guaranteed for a 10-year period. So I would put the date under date start that we received the funds, and then I put a 10-year in the future date. So it's after that point we contact them and say, unfortunately, your tree died. You're willing to make, if you're willing to make another donation, we can label another tree. So
here we go, and we received $1,500.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah, and I use the expected and received funds. If we have situations where the tree costs $1,000 to label, and they get together a family fund, and everybody donates, and they end up sending us $3,000 because that's just how much they gathered, then I know they were great funders. There you go. They went above and beyond their duty.
So I should have some of a smiley grade here. So 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then under type, I also have a series of definitions for. No, you can't export the fundings right to the website, and that was something we were discussing with Elaine that we had thought about doing that, and I had some conversations with Havard about if we were able to publish those so people could search the website for Mrs. Smith and see which tree it was if they wanted to go see it. But you get into privacy. Maybe Mrs. Smith is some kind of hermit and doesn't want her name on the Smith family. They don't want their name on the web, or they don't want grandma listed on the internet because all the hackers or something. I don't know. But so we don't try to publish that to the website. But I do create a spreadsheet that I export regularly and give to our visitor center staff with all of our the funding donors and the tree or bench that they funded, and then they can just quickly look it up and mark on a map where the tree is so that they can go visit it. So it's sort of on a per visit basis, but not on the internet.
Yeah, and I think in general, the first step, if you were to go that route, it would be to start asking permission for this to be made public online. And you might get into, I'm not sure everybody will say yes to that these days, but
right.
So in general, I think the approach that you've done or followed, Greg, is very sort of clever, because that's
it's just very pragmatic. It's just the functions. So
yeah.
But we do, and Elaine was just asking if any of the tasks can be exported to the website. Basically, no. The only other thing that you can export to the websites, and I addressed this to you in the email, was assets. So we add things like benches and tree dedications to assets, and those will get published and then show up on the website under the features tab. So you can look for different sorts of things there, and you can mark end date. No, it does not let you know when the date passes, but when you're on the accession and you're looking at the tree, I'm just changed subjects here midstream, sorry, if you're falling off. I didn't even pause. But just to finish that second thought, if you're looking at the accession, the reference to that funding would be on the References tab. And if you go on here, so there, if you click References, you would see Mrs. Smith, and you see the start and end date right there. So if you did a removal on it, you can say, oh, that's still valid. I need to call up the Smith family and see what other tree they would like to have labeled instead. But then back to the assets, again, quick switch. Then, yeah, we just have those labeled as well, and you can look up various features under assets like benches and things like that, and then have photographs of them as well. And then you can label your restrooms and parking lots and all sorts of things that show up on your map. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it's a double entry. So if, because I have all the, on the Dawes site, if you go up and search for features, tree dedications, and you can see all my features, and I don't know, just put like, yeah, you can just pick one. But then I have photographs of when they did the donation. So it's a nice little history thing there. If you're from Ohio and you know the Seacrest Arboretum, Chadwick was the a forester with the Ohio State University and started the Chadwick Arboretum there. So that's the Stanley Rowe Arboretum near Cincinnati. So we have some dignitaries around here that we've honored trees for, but we also have to add that to the funding screen to keep the data. I mean, I don't have to. I could keep all the dedications just on the assets, but yeah, that's a good one there. Well, you know, the dedication for our Japanese garden that you're hovering over.
Oh yeah, Sorry, yeah, I was. Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway.
I can see you there, Greg, as well. No.
Yeah, that's me. That's me in the back in the trees. That was a bit before my time.
Okay. I see that we're. It was a very nice sort of end to our seminar or webinar, I think, with the tree dedication. Made us a bit more reflective.
See some old pictures. If I could drag your screen around, I could show you some really cool pictures. But
oh yeah,
just under name right there where you're at the top under tree dedication's name, just type in Pershing or PERS and search. And then you'll zoom out, and it's going to be down to the south. No, that's not it. Yeah, keep going south further. Zoom in there, and it's the very top one in that row. No, actually, it's the one under it. But yeah, that one's cool too. Look at that. Isn't that very ethereal looking?
It looks a bit sort of like not necessarily an arboretum, but more like something else. But
back in 1929, there weren't many plants. It was mostly deforested cornfield at that point.
Exactly, that's exactly what it looks like. Yeah, deforested.
Yeah. Nice bow tie there.
Yep. Okay, I think we're sort of exhausted Greg. No, we haven't exhausted Greg, that's for sure. But we've exhausted our time. We've run out of time, so I think we can round off now with this webinar where we talked about the mapping capabilities in IRIS, and then we talked a bit about tree dedications and funding, and yeah. So we'll put this video online, and next time will be, so we'll try to see if we can be a bit more topical again, and see if we can come up with a good topic to dive into next time. And if you have questions for this webinar, please send those in to us, and we'll make sure we cover them in the next month, which will be on Thursday, the 5th of April.
Mm-hmm.
4th of April. Okay, thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you for coming.